But I think the general culture is the following, which is the map is not the territory. I think if there's something that unites all the people that are being drawn to Feÿ is people that have been good at navigating the box, but don't want to exist within the box.
Welcome to the Regeneration Will Be Funded. My name is Matthew Monahan, and in this series, we're exploring the intersections of regenerative finance, technology, and our living planet. Created with Ma Earth, you can find all of our conversations and more at maearth.com. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome. Today's guest is Jessica Flore Angel of Château du Feÿ. Feÿ is a fascinating land project. It is a matriarchal castle in rural France that seeks to create utopia. It brings a real intellectual edge as well as throws some crazy parties and has a passion for making a positive difference in the world. In this conversation, I asked Jessica what it's been like to instigate and steward the Feÿ project, how the pandemic has impacted Château du Feÿ, how does Feÿ deal with issues of money and conflict, and really her general advice and lessons learned for those thinking about starting similar community initiatives or other land projects. This conversation was recorded at the Eco Weaving Gathering at Wilbur in May 2023. I hope you enjoy it. Jessica Flore Angel. We're here with Jessica Flore Angel. She is the instigator and steward of Feÿ. Welcome.
Welcome.
What is Feÿ?
What is Feÿ? Good question. Feÿ is first a place. So it's a chateau from the 17th century, with some parts from the 16th century and other places that were built after. And it's located south of Paris, southeast, in Burgundy, at the entrance of Burgundy. And it's beautiful land with a beautiful view. And it's basically a modern utopia that I've been trying to steward and craft in the past 6 years now. So it has lots of sides and facets.
And I keep hearing about this place. I haven't had the privilege of visiting, but I keep hearing about it within different Web3 communities. And people are like, oh, you got to check out Feÿ and Feÿ this, and we were at this event at Feÿ. And like, so help me understand like the development, the journey, and why are we hearing so much about it?
Yeah, great. I mean, in terms of journey, so I was trained as an architect. So I've always been also really interested in kind of utopian places and phalansteries. So this was this utopian project by French socialist Charles Fourier. And so I've always been interested in places that try to rethink the world and the way we live together, and places that act as social condensers for community, people. And so it can go from a monastery to 70s commune to kibbutz in Israel, Palestine. And so I've researched that a lot. And by researching that, I landed in California, as one will do. And I lived for a year at the embassy, part of the embassy network, and a few folks that are here are part of. And the one who started it also was the people who are stewarding Wilbur, this land. And I got really, I guess, empowered because all of a sudden it was not only a theoretical manifesto, but it was, a concrete project that had really beautiful ramification. And I was like, I gotta do something similar. I was really inspired. That being said, I was living in the city, and at that time, Trump got elected and Marine Le Pen was on the rise. And I think the the kind of observation of a big divide between some sort of cosmopolitan elite of cities between Paris, New York, London, and rural territories, especially on the verge of a climate crisis and potential mass extinction. It felt like we had to take those principles and have it connected to the land. And I also felt that I could have more, I guess, more tools if I was doing something in France, because it's where I'm from. And also as an architect, we always have the kink of old buildings and empty spaces and seeing all the potential. And I think there is a beautiful correlation between not only revitalizing the land, but also spaces and old stone. And often we think of ecological building as super efficient, zero consumption, etc. But I think a place that we've maintained for 400 years is actually probably the most sustainable claim or type of projects, because you care for it. And something that is beautiful and something that is well designed, you just want to maintain it. And people over the years have been maintaining it. So basically the chateau was abandoned. It was for sale for 10 years. It used to be a cooking school. And I completely fell in love with it. I think at this stage, it's like you can think of all the post-rational for buying a chateau. But to be honest, you don't own a chateau owns you. So I think there is something a bit crazy here where it's like I got picked or chosen or something. It's like, when you're traveling and you meet this old Dutch couple and you're like, what's your story? Like in south of France, and like, we were just traveling and we fell in love with this house. And since we've been living here for 30 years.
Right. My brother often says, when people say, how did you end up on this random rural valley farm in New Zealand? And he's like, the land chose us. It feels that way often. It's like, I can explain in hindsight some sort of logic and rationale, but it does feel at some level that it shows us. Completely.
And I think that's how I've been feeling. And it's almost like this force of being there to steward the land. And so 2016 was the purchase. I was 26, so obviously it was impossible to get a loan under my name. So both of my parents are psychiatrists, and by definition a bit crazy. And so we just put like $100K down payment and then put a mortgage. And then I'm giving them rent, and then that pays back the mortgage. So they backed me here. But talking about financing and things like that is like, unless you have people trusting you, it's just like really crazy. There was like no bank that would follow. And then it started being a bootstrap project, doing events, whatever could come, in order to start repairing and and just testing, understanding, just observing even the land and what the space needs, understanding the local area a bit more. I knew it, but it's like.
So at this point, you moved from San Francisco.
So at this point, I'm in New York, actually. I started my architecture practice there, and I'm going back and forth, which at some point obviously is going to be like, how can I, first of all, makes no sense. Second, I'm becoming more and more of a voice around ecology, and then I'm like, I can't be traveling that much. So, I can't justify in my case, I would say. And so in that sense, COVID was a bit of a pivot point.
Got it.
And so basically started doing events. And what is cool is you meet people that are a bit aligned. And so more and more you start having really cool events from, Muslim and Jews converging for peace process, eco gatherings, spiritual retreats, and so on. And also the mix, in a way, I also love the fact that there were, random weddings and things like that, because you meet so many different types of of population, and we did like a lot of parties with like the village, also funerals and a gypsy wedding, and so that's been quite fun. But then obviously that wasn't obviously the end goal.
How did you enroll and enlist like groups of people to help you? Obviously coordinating all of this and doing all this work is a lot. What was the like unifying vision or motivation that people were like, we're going to create this new? What was that?
So that's the thing. At the beginning, it's funny. I think there was guilt and shame in the fact that it was a chateau, and so I think I was quite alone at the beginning. I was quite alone because I was scared to. I just wanted it to be. So that was the very beginning, and then basically the vision got expressed through the first project, like real personal project, which was the festival. And I started I gathered friends and I was like, now I have a place, what do we do? And we started this art festival with like 2,000 people, 9 different disciplines. And that was also a way to project ourselves and what we wanted this place to be.
Wait, 2,000 people as like a first event?
On the first event.
Yeah. Okay. What do your neighbors think? Where does everyone sleep? Like, what kind of chateau is this?
It was crazy. I mean, a lot of people just went for the day, and other people, we were so young and we had no idea. Everybody was like, you guys are crazy, you don't understand. And that's true, we had no idea. And we had basically had 30 people doing programming, and potentially it was me and another person doing like budget and production. It was now retrospectively, it was completely absurd. But it was really amazing. And I think that was the moment where I was like, okay, right now I'm doing events, but basically the vision is for it to be really a laboratory for the world of tomorrow. And for that, we need artists, we need scientists and philosophers, and we need to bring them together. And so that put a seed on potentially the expression of that vision.
The laboratory for tomorrow.
Yeah, bridging also between different types of population, because I'm completely convinced that if the conversation is only happening with, a little group of people, then they're never going to have everyone on board. And I think in the first year of the festival, what was so magical is that we really had like 1/3 of people coming from the local area, 1/3, maybe 50% coming from big cities, like Paris, and then the rest being international. And so that kind of bridge was really, really amazing.
I think it's a really important theme, like that when I studied eco-villages, intentional communities, and studied when I was in that inquiry, spent a lot of time, traveled around to look. One thing that seemed to be common amongst the ones of the past was that there was often like kind of a clear boundaried sense of like, okay, here are the 30 people in our intentional village, and we're going to do things outside of that system. But you're describing a different kind of approach, which is like we actually need to bring lots of different groups and build bridges into space, and you're using kind of these inspirations of architecture and events to do that. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, completely. And I think general community building at all the different scales. And so when COVID arrived, I had started doing like smaller events and connecting with kind of people that can work remotely, etc. But during COVID, I invited 10 friends. Primavera was one of them. And 10 people turned into 30, turned into 200 people crossing the chateau during the lockdown. And since we've been doing this project called Fetopia, which now is also the Feÿ Institute, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's like...
now it's what?
It's also the Feÿ Institute, which is our kind of research and this is a more kind of intellectual branch of the project. But basically, now the way it goes is basically half of the year, it's the community project. You can come for 2 days, 1 week, 4 months. We also have residencies. Then there is a festival, and then there are events. And most of the events now are also aligned with, gathering people to think about, planetary health questions, future of technologies, ecology, etc. So that's the current state. And basically, the fact that there's been a community living there for a year has really created... it's the first time where it felt, okay, the dream was not only in my head now, and it had pivoted to a lot of people. And I felt, I don't know, maybe I might be wrong, but I have a sense that if I die tomorrow, there'll be people to pick it up.
It keeps going.
And that was like a shift in,
That's
I guess,
great.
mental and emotional charge.
Yeah.
And I felt like, okay, I'm not crazy. And I think that community work, we've been also doing it a lot at the local scale and bridging between, I started a nonprofit that's bridging between all the people that or participating towards a sustainable transition. Because it's like you have 5 people doing a different like seed bank project. Stupid, they should collaborate, right? So it's like also, in a way, the only thing that I learned living in a community is how to bring people in the room and be like, how can the sum of the parts be bigger than the parts? And the moment you know how to do that, then you can do it at so many scales.
How do you do that? What are those tips and tricks for? Because it's not necessarily just about put everyone in a room and then the magic all happens, or is it?
There's a bit of that.
There's an art to facilitation, to space holding. Yeah.
Yes, I think. I mean, that's maybe also where the matriarchy comes in. I think that's helped a lot. I mean, you were mentioning that at the beginning.
Yes, that's how I heard about this place. It's this matriarchal castle in the middle of France. You have to go visit.
And I mean, in a way, I think it's. I mean, thank you for all the crazy pervert gurus of the past, but basically, I think as a female-looking person, there's maybe a bit of trust that I gain a bit more easily. And then, you know, there are other stewards that are also female, and like even the hired people at Feÿ, or it's really a matriarchy. It's like girls everywhere. But I think obviously with a lot of care, with a lot of listening. But I think it's that sweet balance between listening and being comfortable with sometimes authority. And I think for the longest time, because I was like, oh, collective governance, everybody is equal. But well, that's not true. It's not everybody is equal. Like, I mean, I have a crazy €1 million mortgage to pay back. Like, you know, I don't have the same stakes. So acknowledging that actually there are always systems of power that sometimes shift. I mean, power or different stakes, and then they can rotate. But that's something to acknowledge, to then be, how can we have it as equal as possible? Understanding that there are people who've been here for 5 years. There's someone that just arrived, and we just have to be quite fluid with that. And I think I've always been very disappointed by people who put too much frame. I think it's almost it's like the medicalization sometimes of health and society. Is like we forget to listen. And I think it's like we do a lot of things around one's ability to resonate. You know, in a way, it's like, how do you practice? You know, how through like improv theater, singing, all these things is just a way to, I guess, not rely on the process, but rely on the human connection in order to also gain trust and be, I guess, benevolent each time you walk along the way.
Right. Okay. So you're putting an emphasis on listening and how to create connection, and then also this notion of kind of like, I've heard it referred to as like dynamic hierarchy, where we often respond to the pyramid shape power structures of our time and maybe go overcorrect into this, you know, oh, well, everything is just this collective circle of decision making. It's like, well, no, in any given moment, there's context, and that context means that maybe it makes sense to follow this person and have structure right now over here, and then a new context, and we're over here. And like, It doesn't mean that we're not all inherently equal beings, but there is like a purpose of this type of behavior.
Rotating leadership, and I think it's also strong proposal. You know, you can only be like, I disagree, if someone, you know, take a bit of a leap of faith, being like, okay, guys, I think this is what we should do, and then someone's like, no, I don't think so. You know, but if it's like, maybe I think that, then, you know, it can take hours before, because everybody is a bit scared of, you know, taking over.
How do you resolve conflicts? Like, what's your general philosophy around conflict management?
Yeah, we flirt a bit with that. So, I mean, with Utopia, it's been crazy how little conflict we've been having. So I'm always very amazed by that. So I wouldn't say I'm a great expert at it, but I think, and it's nice because, you know, we have people that are very nonviolent communication people, then we have other people who hate it and have their other approach. So in general, according to the situation, there might be different stance. But I think the general culture is the following, which is the map is not the territory. I think if there's something that unites all the people that are a bit drawn to Feÿ is people that have been good at navigating the box, but don't want to exist within the box. And so in a way, and that's why we talk about this absurd concept of extitution, which we cherish dearly. But basically, it's like if the map is not the territory, basically it's always your interpretation of a situation, of a reality. And so obviously good communication is about clarifying that, what you understood is not what the other person understood, and just trying to talk through that. But I think it's really a general principle for a lot of the things we do. And this way, that's also like thinking outside of the box. And I didn't realize that, but I think we're extremely creative. I mean, it's always hard to define, what is the zeitgeist or is the
right.
genius loci. It's like an architect term to say like, what is very specific to a place. And I think in that sense, it's like, we do a lot of immersive events, and we're always very creative, experimental. We have a lot of parties as well. So, what might seem as sometimes a bit hedonistic is actually a very productive way of living through concepts and thinking together and bonding, but in a kind of, opening the possibilities.
Got it. So in these kinds of contexts, are you trying to drive, like, as a community towards some sort of collective aims? Like, how is a party productive? You mean in terms of building relationships, or do you mean towards orientation towards some shared goal?
Obviously, I mean, one is like the idea of creating cohesion. And obviously, a community is not the end goal in our case. I mean, it's super nice and it feels good. And it's often we talk about, care for yourself, care for others, care for the world. So it's important to find that balance. But obviously, I think with time, there are obviously projects that whether have emerged or will emerge, in which not all the community is going behind. I think that is actually often a bad idea to be like, I mean, or hard in our case, I would say to be like, this is really what we right. stand about, and now we're all working towards that. I mean, a lot of people don't have the time, the resources, or a bit less aligned, and that's fine. I think because the meta point of Utopia is to show that different people can live together, I think it would be the wrong idea to be now we're all working towards this biodiversity project in the Amazonian forest or something. But there are, for instance, the kind of extitution theory is one project that has emerged.
Can we talk a bit about that? You said it a couple times now. What does extitution mean to you? We had a great conversation with Tony Lai about this, and I can't wait to talk about Jesse Kate and Primavera. But what's it mean to you?
So basically, I mean, it's really Primavera's kink. Let's face it. But as a result, it started at Feÿ, and it has ramification in Feÿ. But basically, if you're looking at a given social organization, most likely you're putting your institutional lens to analyze that organization. So you're kind of being like, oh, she's the CEO and she's giving orders to that person, and here are the structural kind of relationship. And you could almost make like a diagram with boxes and arrows. And so if I'm putting my institutional lens, then I'm putting way more consciousness on all the social dynamics that exist, that are way more moving. So it might be the kind of informal, there are already words, right, to kind of tackle that. But by having a word that is that also is linked to institution in its even word, then it can lead more easily to institution innovation, because then it can be a serious word to bring this attention or awareness when we look at organization. And the fact that, I don't know, maybe I was dating blah, blah, blah. And so in that sense, that has impacted our relationship. Blah, blah is my brother. And so all of that plays a role in how things are being organized. And so it's not a pure coincidence that, all of those utopian projects from the 19th century, the thing I was referring to at the beginning, like the phalanstery, and they all had crazy names, like, a bit cheesy name, like New Harmony. And so this concept of harmony is really that. When you're having a jam session with musicians, it's like the concept of ensemble, right? It's like fine tuning that. It's like practicing that awareness, which is like a dance, right? It's like, okay, now you're talking, and I'm okay. Now he's playing. Oh, that's going a bit louder, and I think we just need to, in a way, dance and sing together in order to collaborate.
I love it. Okay, so you mentioned kind of extitutional theory being, one rabbit hole that you're exploring. What are some of those others, and how do you think about the programming decisions you're making in terms of which kinds of events and groups to bring in?
So far, it's been quite organic. So it's more encounters and people who see the space or part of the community want to organize a workshop, and we're quite agnostic. And I think it has played out really well. But more and more, obviously, we're going to be a bit more intentional about things we want to bring. But for instance, there are a few tracks. I'm going to put it like that instead of going in each workshops and projects, because there are so many. But basically, I would say there is a track around technology and ethics around technology, and obviously AI and for instance, you were talking about the parties. We had like this absurd like immersive party where basically we had to prove to AI how humans are worth something.
Worth saving.
And in a way, it's a bit of a conversation, but instead of just having a conversation in the form of a salon, then people are really doing experiences and immersive experiences in which we are thinking about these things. And so it's like obviously integrating fun with serious things. And so that's one track, which obviously will link to Web3 and all of these debates around, what feels right or not, and when are we kind of fooling ourselves, and also what are all the amazing potentiality around certain advancements in the technological world. Then there is a track around, you were saying, well-being, but what is nice, we also have key members that are thinking mostly at the global health scale. So it really goes from like, I guess mental health at a very individual scale to systemic questions around planetary health, and especially their connection with the climate crisis and how that will impact population. And obviously the question of the community is a fundamental one, because now before you used to have like healers within communities, and you still do in some places, but now it's a bit like, I'm alone in my house or I need to see a doctor. And even in where we are at Feÿ, like they're like literally, it's a medical desert, and you're like an hour and a half far from Paris. And it's crazy. You're like, how did we get there?
Totally.
But if you could like, have certain knowledge of how to cure your community, and also potentially also with the help of technology and decentralization of certain types of knowledge and AI, etc. But how does these things relate, so we can also be in a society that's less about curing but also preventing, because we all know that like exercising, eating well, etc. And so how are also those healthy habits being, how do you feel supported in your healthy habits within a community is also an important thing. So for instance, we have all those funny things. We have the Greek god gym, Greek and goddesses gym, where every day at lunch, rotating, we have people leading a gym session. And so it's just so much easier. Like I can see it, right? Like I exercise way more we the community is here, because it's like you hold each other. We hold each other accountable. Sorry, that's what I meant.
You got it.
And so there is one track around that. And, I think I didn't want to admit it, but, both of my parents are psychiatrists, psychologists. And so I think this idea of like, what makes a good life? What is a life worth of living? What are really the values, We don't want to be in a kind of ascetic guilt and punishment culture that is around performance. We don't want to be in a crazy hedonistic thing, but like, somewhere in the middle, living from love and fresh water is feels like a good trend in a more Epicurean way of thinking. And so that's something that we care a lot about. And to me, I feel like a lot of responsibility because the testimonies are beyond what we ever imagined. People leave sending letters being like, that has really changed my life. I'm not the same person. Like, you gave me meaning. I mean, it's really crazy. And we live in a meaning crisis, right? People are in search for meaning. And I think there is something insanely valuable in doing this type of community projects for that exact reason. So that's obviously one investigation. And then climate obviously is a big one, especially I would say, I'm so happy to be here because I'm realizing how it's been tackled now by the bigger, larger community. But for the longest time, for me, it was more like a French connection or European connection that I had, and super local as well. We convinced the mayor to give a empty military building to 20 eco-activists. And so now there is a sister commune in the local town where so now Joigny, which is the local town, has become actually a very famous town for eco thinking and eco action. Right. and which is so funny because we started and I was like, Joigny is the new Berlin, you'll see. And that's actually, it's not the new Berlin, but it's starting to be quite cool. So
what are you noticing in that distinction between what was happening in the French and European context around climate versus now what you're hearing in kind of this, I wouldn't say global, but it's a Californian context, but with people from all over?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had that discussion with Will Marshall because I think when I was living at the embassy, it felt that the people I was interacting with, a lot of communes were really emerging in the context of a political discourse, which was like, right, and it was very like also housing crisis. We're doing things differently. Right. We are rejecting, in a way, some sort of capitalism, consumerist society, etc. And I didn't find the eco track, and so, but then I was like, but you started Planet, and you're like, yeah, I've always been into these things, and I was like, wow, how did we not connect on that right away back then. But what I think is super interesting is obviously people, all these communities arrive somehow in the same conclusion, whether you're reading Rob Hopkins' Transition Town Manual in England and the whole kind of Totnes sphere, or a lot of the eco-villages. I would say in France, communities are mostly created by people who have an ecological mission. It's unless you have a bit of like artist squads, but it's really more rare. Well, here I would say there's a kind of a variety. But at the end of the day, everything connects to California. I mean, it's so interesting how yesterday we did the council of all the.
Council of all beings.
Of all beings, yeah. Le conseil de tous les êtres vivants, mais it's like, I all these things I've learned in French first. And, it's things I found, I discovered in Joigny with all the, my eco crew. And then I come here and I realize, obviously, Joanna Macy is all the kind of California, it connects to the Californian world. And I just went to Esalen as well. So how, I guess.
Was that your first time?
It was my first time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so how spirituality, well-being connects as well. So I think in a way, everybody's like, I mean, a lot of people are actually kind of converging and going in the same direction. And I think it's all about like mapping and then at some point being big enough that then we'll have the tools to replace a obsolete system by something that feels more aligned with what we're already seeing as working.
Can I ask you about that? Like, what are your observations and reflections about the system that surrounds us outside of these community experiments, and what has you most enlivened?
Yeah, well, I think if I can speak from the place where I'm probably the most comfortable, which is around space and architecture. I think it's always funny because architecture is always last. You have kind of innovations, and then at the end, architecture follows. And I think I see a lot of potentiality in that regard, in the way that the internet has completely changed the way we work and live. But I think it's taking us time to actually really implement that. But I think that the decentralization, which is obviously the premise of the Web3 community, can actually be embodied also in spatial project. And so as a result, I think what we've been observing, which is literally what has been, creating so many issues at the political scale, is that for the first time, where you live is exactly the way you're going to vote. It's like fascinating. Like if you looked at, for instance, the Hillary-Trump election, you have like a perfect line showing like the more I live next to people, the more I'm voting Democrat, and the more I'm isolated, the more I'm. So it's like now we're seeing really the relationship between governance, politics, and territories, and so it's like, first, how do we shuffle that? I think that's the first thing that we really need to do, and so therefore people. Community can just mean like feeling connected to your village. Doesn't mean living in a commune. I mean, I really don't think that's for everyone. So I think it's just like finding a sense of belonging in a way. I think that's number one. And I think the premise is also that now you can also find that online. And I think there is, how do we steward and find this sense of belonging also online is important.
One thing I've noticed in the Web3 conversations is, because there is that finding one another online and coordinating online and digital organizations, all the more importance and emphasis then on when we do come together face to face and in person. And what is that tension and that relationship between digital coordination, cross borders, and look how fast we can just connect on Zoom and all this rest, versus like what's lost in that, or what else can be valued and reignited when we are together. And so, DAOs experimenting with different types of cadences around, going into a house together and living together for a week, or, different types of seasonal events and ways to reconstruct what used to maybe happen in a corporate office space.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just like a whole new world of experimentation, of fragmentation, of, rediscovering new ways to do this. Curious if you have any reflections on that, because it sounds like it's very squarely within what you're exploring.
Yeah, and it's always funny to see to what extent, how rapidly will someone connect with the land according to also what they do. And obviously, I've also seen cases in which full immersed programmer obsessed with DAOs is going to spend like 3 weeks at fair without necessarily going to see the forest. So I think we can all help each other, gaining awareness on different things. And obviously the world is large, so we all need people to focus on different things. And that's what's amazing, because I also see people who have no understanding whatsoever of technology. Technology is also like, it's always a bad thing. And this way, this encounter is really nice. And so we always say that we are bridging between the world of yesterday and the world of tomorrow. How do you, think of a space, how do you think of the future in a space that is 400 years old? How do you bridge between disciplines? And how do you bridge between the local and the global? And I think what the local brings is the terrestrial. Like being earthian. And I think the only danger by an extreme metaverse is that you forget how to connect with the beauty of the real, right? And of the earth. And I think is is just about finding that sweet spot. And I think if any community is based on rituals, rules, and values. And I think there is many ways in which, DAOs can find these rituals that actually are linked in caring for a space and a place. And I've seen that like Feÿ has played this role also of a home for people that are more nomadic. And it's really nice to see that they don't have to be there all the time, but it's like you come back and it feels that this is a place in which there is a sense of safety as well.
Totally. Yeah. Speaking with people, they can't wait to get back, or they're already planning next year going back to Feÿ. And I'm like, wow, that's place has had quite an impact on you. What can you share with me your experience from the pandemic? And I'm just so curious, like it sounds like that helped anchor you, and you were no longer going back and forth from New York. But what else did you observe during that time, and how did it impact your space?
Yeah. And before I answer that, I think I just had a thought on. I think it's always so funny when you have the super community-minded people and then the DAO people, and sometimes I realize they actually don't know each other.
Right.
So there've been so many, and I'm
totally.
like, you have like both people obsessed with governance, community stewardship, and I think there needs to be more cross-pollination because the same issues are happening. Like, oh, I want something super decentralized, but actually it all falls on me. Or, when is it a DAO on paper, but actually exactly like there is, it's like you're the one's voting ever. And so I've observed that several times, that it's super cool when these worlds meet and, one experience inform the other, vice versa. And I think that's really fascinating. And I also believe that people innovating in that space will help for more collective ownership. Like my goal for me is really like to sell the chateau. And you were talking about benevolent dictatorship. I think it's fine until it's no longer okay. So I think it's fine to sometimes start a project because I think it made it so much easier, especially at that scale, than having 10 people and taking the risk that once we're doing the project, we're just hating each other, etc. And I think right now I actually know already who's the committed community. And now we can kind of craft something for, is it like a foundation that, and then, or is it like a LLC and you have shares of the LLC? Or, is, I think DAOs are on their verge of being a bit more integrated to the world legal system. But I think I'm waiting to see innovation in that space in order to take that leap of faith and structure things a bit differently.
That certainly matches my experience as an entrepreneur, as well as in this Web3 space, the lingo being progressive decentralization. Like it's most effective to recognize, like, well, maybe a project starts with one person. Well, one person has to be accountable. One person has to do all of the work, and then there's 2, and then there's 10, and there's like, how do you continue to gradually share power and governance and to decentralize as the project it's appropriate. You can go too fast and it turns into chaos, or there's not enough structure and accountability already baked in. There's not enough of a culture that is aligned with the mission that you're trying to serve. But you can also fall victim to the mistake that often is the case, which is clinging to power, holding on, wanting to be at the top of the hill, and so forth. So it's a tricky balance, I think. But I am encouraged by how much talk of decentralization is happening in the Web3 context, because it feels like there's like a natural tailwind to everyone wanting to see it happen. So I think that's positive.
Completely.
Anyway, okay, so back to the pandemic. What was that like for you?
I mean, what changed is actually, I think, why the project didn't start from the beginning with a community is also that it was rural France. And like, literally, a lot of my friends were like, Jess is cool, but like super far. Like,
not moving after the.
So I was on the side looking for a community space in Paris. Someone like Prima was like, no, I'm not living even outside of we have this like loop around Paris called the Périphérique. It was like, no, I'm even going like outside of that. And now she's like half of the year at fair, right? So it's like, I think all of a sudden it helped people being fine with the idea to live in the countryside. And actually how, not even being fine, being amazed and astonished to what extent it is an amazing, fulfilling way to live. I mean, even if you're like the more productive, obsessed type, because it's just more natural, right? Like I always give this example where it's like, okay, I want to take I've been working all day and I have a bit of a social craving. I'm like, okay, it would be cool to connect with people and have a drink. And then I'm going to take my phone. I'm in Paris. I'm going to text like 5 people. Do you want to grab a drink? Maybe someone's going to be like, oh yeah, maybe. And then we take like an hour to decide where to meet. I take 30 minutes of subway. You take 30 minutes of subway. Now we have to make use of it. So we spend an hour talking when actually in 20 minutes, we just wanted a little catch up. And then I come back, etc. The whole thing is a 5 hours like block of time when literally at fair, I'm in my room, I go down, there's someone in the kitchen, we have a bit of a 20 minutes chat, I go back up, I work. And I think having something a bit more integrated like that, just in terms of spatial arrangement, makes so much more sense. It's just it's more natural, it's more efficient, it's more fluid.
Yeah. So the pandemic, I guess, reinforced that.
Exactly. And so the pandemic was also a way to slow down. Obviously, I think there was this idea of slowing down. Obviously, we felt extremely privileged to not be stuck in a small apartment. Really growing our vegetables, doing all that process, and being in our bodies. Which I'm not necessarily the best person to incarnate that, but I'm really trying. And I think there's something about being physical, about kind of obviously how do you say that, a sane head in a sane body? Like, I mean, we have this like sane in French, but yeah, I think being a bit more in the land, in the forest, being together, taking the time to actually be and be together was quite nice. And you realize that unless the entire world is slowing down, it's really hard to slow down.
Yeah.
And so that's still something where I'm trying to think, how do we do that?
So for someone that's listening or watching this, that's thinking about their own dream of going off into the countryside and starting a land project or an eco-village or a community or an event space, like, I would love to hear your reflections on like lessons learned, mistakes, advice, tips, tricks, and how do we make this journey just a bit easier, because it's not easy for those listening.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, maybe a bit more due diligence than what I did, but in general, due diligence can be a good way to get you out of a good idea. I think there's always a kind of commit and figure it out. We talked about it. I mean, on paper, it was an absurd, stupid idea, and all the chateaus are crumbling, and it's really hard to make it work. But for some reason, if it comes from passion, also that's the thing, is like, if it comes from your guts, then you'll have way more energy because you're very aligned than something that maybe objectively is better, but feels less connected to you.
Right.
I think that's one. I think also people are like, sometimes people do have space, like, I don't know, like an old barn from their family or something. And they're like, so this is a good thing to do. And I'm like, no, the good thing to do is what, it's like entrepreneurship in a way, is like what feels aligned with you. And if actually you're like a big hunter and that's your thing, just like, I don't know, do something around hunting. I don't care. But like, that's where you're going to be able to pour so many hours versus like, the market wants that. I think for those projects, it just has to come from your soul and your heart as much as possible. I also think that to be honest, you don't need, it's almost, I'm the wrong example. It's like a massive chateau. It almost feels like the thing is, unless you're committing full time, you can't do it. I actually think it starts with like, just make some cookies and knock at your neighbor's door. I mean, every building in a way is a small commune potentially. And so I think it's all about the lot. Like we have like, you know, Telegram, Signal, WhatsApp, whatever groups. You can bring cookie. Taking that leap of faith that actually collaboration is always a good idea. And especially in Europe, we have the most beautiful architecture for that. We have like villages where there are like little markets, little cafe, like small houses. You have neighbors, but you also have your autonomy. And I think it's just about if everybody spends a bit more time thinking how they can collaborate with their neighbor, then I think you can find the same joy and that same sense of belonging with actually very little resources.
Love it. I'm thinking, so we just met, I think, 48 hours ago or something. And if I may, like my experience of you is that you're very approachable and like you seem very comfortable walking into, you know, this gathering where not everyone knows each other. And, you know, there's a lot of different people coming from different walks of life. And you mentioned kind of like, well, maybe because it's matriarchal that it's a bit more approachable and people feel safe and at ease. But I think it's also probably something with your unique personality and persona of being able to like disarm and to kind of, I'm curious if you have anything that's running in the conscious programming of how you meet a stranger and like kind of create those, because it's core to your theory of change, right? It's like, how do we build bridges? How do we connect from all walks of life? And I'm just wondering if there's more to it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit that I did take one day a personality test with my husband, Ed, who's also now playing a big role in being a fun entertainer of the space. And I started the project before we were together, but now is an important piece of it. And we scored like, he was like 90% extroverted and I was like 99 and I was like 98. So like, shit, like if we go in a party, you know, we're probably the two people talking to. Right. So I think obviously it's like, if really talking to other people is like a draining thing, maybe find a collaborator that has, and in a way that is also a drawback. I mean, it's a good skill to be like a people's person and a connector. And then, you know, maybe that makes me less good, for instance, at writing. I've been like, it's been harder for me to really take the time outside to be in the moment and just be like, I'm going to be writing and explain what's going on, etc. And so I think, and it's like any project, right? You understand your strengths and your drawback, and then you find people that
complement you.
But I agree that, I mean, warmth is like, it's like désamorcer. It's like a bomb. How do you call when it's like you have a bomb and you have the word to say that you're
disarm it.
Yeah. And I think I learned that from other people. It's actually, it's definitely something you learn. I don't think I was born like that. I think I was way more like in like Paris, was just like, you look like this, and I had this amazing, I had a few teachers that impressed me. And then I was like, I want to become like this. When I was living in Switzerland for my undergrad, I was in a big apartment. I was already like running an apartment where I had like housemates and it was like a bit of a central party space. So I've been doing that for years. Right. I've been asking my friends for money for years, which is like, actually, that's actually a tricky skill. You got to be like very comfortable. I want to hear about that next. Yeah. I'd be like, sorry, you owe me, like, you owe $20 to the thing. And, but basically, it was a bit of a party space, hub, etc. in Lausanne. And so the neighbor hated us. We had like 7 letters of complaint, etc.
Only imagine why.
And then I had this new housemate. It was like, he's so sunny that everybody loves him. Like you can't just, I don't know, just the way he is like, you can't just, and if you're a bit aggressive, then he's so sunny. After a moment, you're like, and basically the neighbor became our best friends. You know, it was this like guy with a little chihuahua, a bit lonely, and you know, I was probably the one working the hardest in this house sharing situation where they were all in hospitality school, which is basically a bit of party school. And so I would wake up in the morning going for like my final project reviews, and they will still be like partying at like 8 a.m. with the neighbor. And I was like, the only thing that my friend did was basically smile, and be warm, because one has to always come from the premise if someone is a bit aggressive, if someone is a bit, cold, that's their own journey, and it's their own thing. It's not because of you. And actually, you can even help them to make them feel better.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, it's quite simple. and okay, so how do you navigate topics around money in your community and with friends and in these contexts and with all the exchange and transactions?
Well, now there's someone asking for. Now we have an automatic system for the next season, which is good. It was so absurd. We have so many technology people, but for some reason the system was like an Excel spreadsheet, and like you send an email. It's absurd how low-key the whole thing was. I don't know. I think it was so hard when I was young. Like I was 17 in this Switzerland situation, and I've almost forgotten. Now it feels so natural. It's fine. They're just paying for the thing. It's not.
Yeah.
But money is a. I think it's worse than sex and death, and it's, to be honest, it's like the one thing that people never really talk about. Like I have no idea the net worth or the salaries of most of my friends, and it's like, there was this really absurd thing where it's like with the chateau project, I found out like two people were like, oh, actually, yeah, we do have chateaus in my family, and I'm like, what? And you're like, oh, they're so ashamed for people to know that they have chateaus that they don't do anything with it. And I think there is also that sense of like hiding privilege, when for me is like, okay, if we also live in a society that's like, privilege should be used and should be, put at the service of others. But sometimes guilt and shame create like a status quo. So money is a tricky thing. To be honest, I'm still like wrapping my head around it, and I think everybody varies on a scale of like, being super like neurotic and wanting to make sure they're feeling safe. And obviously my immigrant lineage, there's sometimes a bit of that where I'm like, you never know. So Ed is very different, is like feeling safe all the time. And I'm like, Ed. So I don't know. Yeah, I think we all have a different relationship to money. And I think that will really go in the category of listening. I think opening spaces in which you never take for granted. I think too often I take for granted that people have the same relationship to money than me. And sometimes I realize that, because it's so comfortable for me to be like, oh, I think you owe this, and for your room you extended, so okay, I think there's gonna be another 400 euros or whatever. And I don't realize that for others it's really hard. Yeah. So I just found out that there is a friend that I've owed like $200, which is a lot, for like a year, but he pinged me once like a year ago and I completely forgot. And then he's been like sitting in the and then I was like, but like
just tell me.
Yeah. And so but maybe I should have also, taken into account that not everybody asks twice, 3 times. So
sure. Yeah, there's so much trauma, so much sensitivity, so many different relationships to it. I'm always curious how much the medicine is to make things more transparent. And like that we all become more financially literate, that we all become more transparent with it, or how much it's like actually to just somewhat like de-emphasize it in the social context.
Yeah.
It sounds like you kind of have a bit of both, where it's just like, oh yeah, you owe this much and da-da-da, but at the same time, people aren't necessarily talking too much about their personal financial situation.
And the difficulty to work with disparities. It's obviously 10 times easier if everybody is more or less in the same social class. But it's like even the subtle violence of some discussions on a signal group. Totally. Like someone being like, oh guys, I'm going to South Africa. I'm so embarrassed sometimes of the, cosmopolitan elitism that might appear just because sometimes people have the means to like travel or rent a space, and then you want cross-pollination, but like for someone, basically 3 nights in that place is their full month salary. Yeah. And so how do you reconcile with that? And that person is not necessarily going to express that they feel, so they might distantiate themselves, or I forgot to So for instance, I'm just like, oh, so that's going to be an additional blah, blah. And if I'm just saying it as if it's like not a lot, then I'm not acknowledging that actually it's consequent
decision.
money. So all that, I think, to be honest, I don't feel yet an expert in that. And that is definitely an area where I think I need to grow, but also I think it would be really good to have more tools and
do you do any sort of like pay what you can sliding scales, or do you do scholarships for certain events?
I do a lot of that. So and that's, for instance, where there's this problem of like you want to make it objective, and at the same time right now it's just a bit hard because it's a bit of case by case. So that's something we need to kind of make a bit more transparent. But so far, there's always been this rule that, like, if you really want to come to Feÿ and you have no money, we always find a way. So we have also dorm options. We have like work exchange, or you can help a little bit with something, or we always like find a solution. So that's been literally, I don't want money to be in the way of being able to experience if you want to experience it. And then we have sometimes tiers according to the events and the thing, or even the festival is like 3 times cheaper for the local area than for...
Got it.
Because, I mean, the disparities are like this, actually. It's like 80% of monetary exchanges. I think I read that once. I would have to look at the source. But basically, a really big percentage of monetary exchange are centralized in Paris, in France. So, for instance, people are just outside of the, of the flows of market flows, basically.
Fascinating. Well, I'm really appreciating the conversation. I can't wait to visit someday. Are there any other questions I didn't ask, or reflections or things you wanted to share before we close?
No, I think I'm excited for more places and actors of systemic change to gather exchange, and I think we're all gonna converge, and it's gonna be beautiful.
Yeah. It's so much of the impulse for this series is around bridging communities, and so I really resonate with your expression of that work. Thank you so much for joining us, Jess.
Thank you.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jessica. I really appreciated what she said about the most sustainable building being these places that people choose to invest in and maintain for hundreds of years. Also, I'm still cracking up at the fact that the first event they ran at Château du Feÿ was a 2,000-person festival. Definitely takes a certain kind of personality to pull that off. And interesting to reflect on what Jess shared about how guilt and shame can make us hide our privilege. If you want to learn more about Feÿ, go to chateaudufeÿ.com. There's a link in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this conversation, you might be interested in hearing the discussion we had with Primavera de Filippi, the instigator of this term extitutional theory, as well as Jessie Kate Shingler of the Embassy Network. All of our conversations and more are available at maearth.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.